Yeah, I know, a lot of you want to talk about this, but we'll review this crap later, okay? Some people may think it's stupid to make an entire video dedicated to what the next name of an iPhone's going to be, but that's not me. The news is dry, and I honestly think there's enough to talk about because I've never seen the Apple community so divided since the Lightning versus USB-C debate, which was just a couple weeks ago. So in today's video, I'm diving into some of the naming possibilities with the next-gen iPhone that's coming out likely at the end of March, potentially early April, because there's so many different opinions and so many different arguments as to what it should be called that I thought compiling them would be fun. Let's begin. So Tim, you really gotta help us out here. We don't know what to freaking call this thing. If you want to just drop a website refresh, unveil this thing now, that would be fine. So I ran a Twitter poll to see what most people would be comfortable with naming this thing, and unlike a lot of Twitter polls, this one was pretty split up. We could not have a giveaway winner and say this one's clearly what most people want. However, coming in at the largest portion is 30%, which gives you an idea of how divided people are on this, with just calling it the next generation iPhone SE. Basically, we would refer to it as the 2020 SE, which means that there's no number following the phone. They do the exact same branding they did back in 2016, except we'll refer to it by the year now, or maybe we'll refer to it by the screen size. But in regards to how Apple will market it or brand it, most people voted on the poll for iPhone SE 2020, which, I'll be honest, that's probably high on my list. I think that it's consistent with a lot of the rumors and reports in the past. We consider it kind of a special edition because, for one, it's not coming out in September. For two, it's technically a new phone. You know, it's not just a new product red version of an iPhone 8. So it's not just a fashion thing. This is new hardware. But what the original iPhone SE was back in 2016 when they unveiled it was recycling an old traditional design so that they could save money, but equipping it with the latest CPU and cameras. So that's why a lot of people enjoyed the iPhone SE, because they got those flagship specs. They got a decent camera at a reasonable price point. Just you had to put up with a somewhat traditional design. And that's pretty much what's happening this time around with the next generation SE. Okay, it's probably got some updated cameras, it's got a new CPU, it's a traditional design. This one is actually not going to have 3D touch, but hey, it's going to start at $400. So if you can get a $400 iPhone with the latest CPU and that camera likely supporting portrait mode photography as well as night mode, I could see that selling particularly well. But of course, that's only 30% of the poll. What came in at a very, very close second at 29% was what we've seen a lot of articles describe this iPhone as, which is iPhone 9. From a logical standpoint, I can see why a ton of people may like this one, because it's better than the iPhone 8, obviously, better camera, better specs, so it's an upgrade from the 8, but because of its traditional design, we shouldn't really call it the 10, because it doesn't have a notch, it doesn't have Face ID, it's got those traditional bezels, it's got the old-fashioned home button, so in that sense, we shouldn't quite give it the title of 10, so 9 is a nice little in-between zone, and we also never got the iPhone 9, so people who are wondering what happened to that phone, how come Apple went from 7 to 8 to 10, this would answer that. Okay, the mystery is solved, even though this is all marketing. Like, are you also gonna ask Samsung what happened to the Galaxy S11 through 19? No, we're not gonna question that, but the reason iPhone 9, of course, is probably not going to be it, my personal prediction, is that from a marketing standpoint, a lot of tech companies get very, very juvenile into the world of, well, the phone with the higher number is the newer one, so it wouldn't be a good idea to be selling iPhones like the 11 and Samsung coming out with their S20 when Apple's unveiling the 9, because that feels very dated and old, but at the same time, I kind of get it. This is kind of a dated phone. It's not really meant to compete with the iPhone 11 or the Galaxy S20. This is meant to be a under-the-radar, lower-budget iPhone, so calling it the 9, I don't think it's very likely. Just from a marketing standpoint, doesn't sound like something Apple would do, but from a logistics standpoint and just in consistency with the rest of their lineup, this one probably makes the most sense, but that's likely why they're not going to do it. Coming in number 3, which actually surprised me. I added this option to the poll thinking that, not that many people are gonna choose this. This is kind of that dead answer that very little people vote for. It was actually third at 25% of the votes, which is iPhone SE 2. So I can also understand the argument with this vote, because you don't like that we would have to call it the new iPhone SE. You think it's way too complicated that we would have to refer to it as the 2020 iPhone SE, that's too many syllables, or calling it the 4.7-inch iPhone SE. From a syllable standpoint, standpoint and just being minimal with what you have to describe it with, if we called it iPhone SE 2, that's still a lot of syllables. It's still pretty clunky, but everyone would know exactly which iPhone you're referring to when you bought that thing and you started using it. If you're walking down the street with your new iPhone and someone asks what kind did you get, you can say you just got the SE 2, which, I don't know, a little clunky, a lot of letters, a lot of numbers, but Apple's also known for that too. I mean, they're currently selling phones like the 11 Pro Max, which I find bizarre and kind of weird. Their naming scheme's been screwed up for a long time, but 25% of that poll was like, you know what, SE2, that makes a lot of sense. So again, from a marketing standpoint, I think it's a little bit too complicated. Apple has made SE products in the past and they never made sequels to them and just called them SE2. That would also imply that this is some type of annual thing where they're going to be recycling traditional designs like every 4 years, and then one day we would get the SE3 for some reason. I don't know. It doesn't sound like something Apple would do, but still, it's worth mentioning given so many of you guys wanted it. And then the fourth option, the one that I didn't expect to come in last, was just iPhone. Some people don't like this one because it requires them to be very, very specific when referring to the phone. So if Apple decided to market it as just regular, plain old iPhone, don't apply any numbers, letters, or anything to it, that means all of us techies, when we're referring to the new iPhone, have to say the 4.7-inch 2020 iPhone or the regular iPhone, and we kind of have to make up our own vocabulary to describe it, and a lot of people don't like that. But it's important to remember Apple kind of does this already with the iPad lineup. So we have the iPad Air, we have the iPad Pro, we have the iPad Mini, but also the most popular one, the most common default one they recommend to most people, is just called iPad. There's no suffix, it's not a next generation or anything. When they're listing compatibility and stuff, they'll call it iPad 7th generation, which I'm not exactly sure how they would do it with this phone. Would they call it iPhone 2020 generation? Like, there would have to be some type of fine print way of describing it for Apple's sake, but they honestly could do any number of things. It's impossible to know for sure, which is why most of this video is pointless. But what I'm saying is, with other lineups in the past, it kind of lines up with what they've been doing, because we have the regular old iPad. We also, for a while, had the just regular MacBook, which we all ended up referring to as the 12-inch MacBook. Apple also sells the iMac and doesn't really specify the difference between the sizes. So they do this kind of thing in the past, where just for the sake of simplicity and for the sake of liking the way how clean everything is and being minimal, they'll just call it introducing iPhone, which is just the right amount of phone for people who are trying to save money. What I have noticed in the past is when we speculate on what the name of the next generation Apple product is going to be, it always ends up being wrong. We always end up getting it completely off, and Apple ends up going with something completely unexpected. Like, for the longest time, we thought the iPhone XR was going to be called the iPhone 9 because it's not OLED and it's kind of more traditional with some of its hardware, but it didn't end up being called that. Apple just decided to call it XR, which threw everyone off, and I feel like it's very possible Apple could do another wild card like that, where they unveil this thing and they give it a completely new name that doesn't have anything to do with previous existing models, like the iPhone B emoji we talked about, or some people on Twitter were suggesting things like iPhone Air, because we have MacBook Air, we have iPad Air, why not bring it to the iPhone given this is so small and light? Some people suggested an iPhone Lite version of marketing, which I've never seen Apple do in the past, so I would be somewhat surprised if they brought it to the iPhone. But hopefully in this video you got an idea of some of the pros and cons of all of them. There's reasons to go with them, there's reasons to not go with them, but whatever Apple chooses, it's probably going to tick everybody off. iPhone Mini or whatever. There's no way to please everyone. That's what a divided crowd means. Feel free to let me know what your best guess is by hitting me up over on Twitter or joining my Discord. And that is it, I think. And pretty soon we can actually dive into our discussion about the flip. This is your Apple Shape here. I'll see you in the next one.